Cool. All right, hi John.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
All right. Well, we're here on a blistery morning on the Greenway.
It is quite cold, isn't it?
A little bit, but hopefully hearty conversation will warm us up. So you're a local councillor here in Newham, so we're going to talk about your life here in East London, in Stratford, and the surrounding area, and where we are, which is the Greenway.
Sure.
It's got a long history, how it came to be, and maybe other bits of transport in the area as well, or anything else that tickles our fancy. But perhaps introducing yourself.
Sure.
So. I can hold it. Yeah,
no,
it's
sure.
fine.
So my name's John Morris. I lived in Newham my entire life. I'm actually the third generation of my family to be born here. I was born in Newham General, which actually borders the Greenway. I grew up in Plaster. I spent some time in Beckton. So been in Plaster my entire life. So the Greenway. First time I got introduced to it was when my friend's dad bought this little tiny motorcycle and decided to give us a ride. Obviously wanted to keep us away from traffic, but also wanted to give us a good time. Took us onto the Greenway from Upton Lane all the way to Stratford. He took us on the ride. Really fun time, but that was the first time I got introduced to the Greenway. Since then it's really been a good pathway to travel to different parts of Newham. So when I used to work in retail in Beckton by Galleons Reach, I used to walk or cycle down the Greenway to my job from Plastow. It's a wonderful piece of infrastructure.
It just connects like lots of different parts so easily, and in a green way as well. Literally.
100%. It's a major cycle and infrastructure. So I think it's Quietway 22. It was adopted by TfL, I think, back in 2019. Mahatma Gandhi, when he used to visit back in 1931, he stayed in Kingsley Hall in Tower Hamlets, but he actually met Charlie Chaplin in Newham, but he used to take morning walks up and down the Greenway.
Wow, history.
Yeah. It's amazing, and what he liked about it was that it was high up, and you had a good view of the scenery around the Greenway as well. So back in the 1930s, obviously, people used to use it to exercise as well.
Yeah, and you, just going back a bit, you mentioned TfL, so who actually owns it? Do you know? Or?
Thames Water.
Thames Water okay.
Owns it. We have a relationship, we as a Newham Council have a relationship where we invest in the local scenery and in the infrastructure. So while Thames Water owns and manages parts of it, we do invest in it as well, and so does the GLA. So recently,
the Greater London Authority.
The Greater London Authority, yeah. So we back in 2022, we've successfully been awarded one of only 19 projects in the Rewilding Fund.
Is that a national?
No, it's just a GLA fund.
Okay.
And it was to repollinate parts of the Greenway.
Yeah, and I think there's a part of the Greenway closer towards Beckton. There's someone who has like a farm flower shop. I don't know if you remember it or if I'm making it up. I remember it years ago, and I've seen like people do walking trips down the Greenway, and there was a shop. Anyway, I think suffice to say there is a lot of different greenery and wildlife along the Greenway. It's actually quite rich, like biodiverse wise.
100%. So further south from where we are is the Channel Sea River. It's an ancient river, used to go right into Stratford Station. And recently there's a place called Surge Co-op, and what they want to do is take the banks of the Channel Sea River and rewild it and make it available to people as a public garden. But one of the things that they have shown recently was that fish have been rehabilitated the Channel Sea River, but in some cases seals have been seen swimming there as well.
Seals,
yeah.
Wow.
And on the other end of the Greenway where it meets East Ham, there's the East Ham Nature Reserve. So it's a church, but around the church is a nature reserve where it's been rewild. You'll obviously have the Beckton Alps, which is
yeah.
a former snowboarding
Yeah.
area, now abandoned, but like we call it the Beckton Alps because it's Noom's only mountain, well, hill.
Yeah, I remember that as well. I remember going. So there used to be a Save Centre in Beckton. It's now
Yeah.
Sainsbury's. And I remember seeing those apps, and I remember thinking, "Wow, that's like the closest I'll ever get to snow or Alps." And I was like, "I'm gonna snowboard on there when I'm older."
Did
And
you
I
ever
feel
used to
so
climb
gutted.
it?
No, because like by the time we could afford going up there, or I was old enough to go on my own, it was abandoned. It was closed.
Well, I went up there when they closed it. Oh, sorry, after they closed it to do a bit of exercise. So I think it was about 16 years ago. It was closed down, but you could still climb up it.
Okay.
But now they close it off because
Completely. Oh.
well, now it's actually, I think now they understand the health and safety
Yeah.
dangers that it presents, because actually there are bits of it with metal sharp shrapnel pointing out of the hill that it's probably not safe to go along. But I went up there sometimes as a kid. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Good views of all of Noom as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing about this Greenway. Like, it's actually, I mean, for people who love where they live here in Stratford, Beckton, West Ham, it's a very scenic route. Like, even where we're just looking now, seeing the kind of East London skyline.
Yeah.
There are other bits of it there where it's looking over parks. It's a very culturally rich place that, yeah, I suppose for parts of Newham that are, quite deep in poverty, etc.
Yeah.
It can be, I don't know, a bit of a welcome relief. It can kind of, help in.
Well, one of the things that the pandemic has shown us is not everyone has equal access to green space. Not everyone has their own garden, and that's when we figured out that actually public parks really do matter. And I think a lot of people actually discovered the Greenway because of the pandemic.
Yeah, a lot more people walking. Yeah.
And absolutely. So while I used to go through as a kid, it was actually really underinvested and forgotten. But during the Olympics, what they did was they repaved the entire Greenway, and it was in 2016 that they actually installed 24-hour lighting. So what they used to do is they used to close the Greenway at night time and you couldn't use it. But now, and I've done this plenty of times, you can actually travel up and down the Greenway at night time now.
Yeah, and we were saying, we might do like a second half at night because it just looks different and it looks lively 100%. And really nice at night. Yeah, because I remember sometimes, so the church I used to go to in Plaistow had some kind of what we call night vigil service, kind of midnight mass in other words, and coming to church sometimes we would walk along the Greenway, but for those night services we couldn't, and it makes sense now because it was closed. I've seen as well the green spaces, and there's lots of access to kids parks as well. So further north down this way, there is, I think just to the left here, there's some kids parks. One of the things I see from Newham Council is this 15 minutes agenda of people being no less than 15 minutes away from green spaces, parks, shops, etc.
Basic amenities.
Yeah, basic amenities. Can you talk a little bit more about that and kind of what its ambition is, or what?
Sure. I think it was back in 2021, we submitted 2 bids for about 20 million each. And they both focus on different parts of Newham.
To the GLA or to a national
fund? To the Department of Levelling Up.
Okay.
And local government. They keep on changing its name, so I don't know what it is now.
Yeah.
But this was part of their
Levelling Up. Leading.
100%. And it was part of their Levelling Up agenda. And while most of it was aimed at particular areas of the north of England, people often forget there are parts of London which are left behind. And Newham and Barking fit their criteria, what was left behind. And we submitted 2 bids, each for about 20 million, each one focusing on a different part of Newham. So one bid was on the southern part of Newham, which included a Canning Town Heritage Centre and improvements to the Greenway around Beckton. But another bid was for 15-minute neighbourhoods, and that focused along the Romford Road area.
Okay, yeah.
And so all the wards and areas around Romford Road would see improvements that will enable you to walk and cycle to wherever you need to go within 15 minutes. And the idea is your basic amenities, so where you would like to shop, where you visit your doctor, everything like that should be available to you within 15 minutes of walking and cycling.
Yeah. A really good initiative. Just going back a step on the levelling up agenda point. Do you feel it's easy or difficult to kind of make the case when large parts of the north are struggling, and that levelling up agenda was about that kind of north-south, equalisation? Or do you think, as you say, Newham is such a particular case from other parts of London that we still have to maintain that focus on investing within East London?
I say that when we talk about levelling up, the issue there is that we talk about general prosperity and what we think growth is and investment in transport, but actually if you look at levelling up, different communities and different areas have their own issues that need to be levelled up. So in Newham we have the second highest child poverty rate in the entire country. I think like 50% of our children live in poverty. It's the same in town hamlets. We in London have a housing crisis that exists in some of the big cities in the north, but actually big chunks of the north do not have a housing crisis. We do. Even in the major cities such as Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, the housing crisis is just in a different scale to ours. And so when we need to talk about levelling up, we need to talk about levelling up in policy areas. So how can we level up child poverty so it's as low as any other part of the country? How can we level up housing ownership and housing costs so it's equal to other parts in the country in London, as much as how can we level up parts of the north so their prosperity, access to transport is equal to that to Londoners.
Yeah. Can we just move back a bit, because I just want to make sure we're in shot here. Interesting. Perhaps moving on to other areas of policy interest. So I think transport is one. Do you have a forgive my ignorance, a council responsibility for that, or a committee?
So I'm a member of the Regeneration, Environment, Housing and Sustainable Transport Committee.
That was it, yeah, sustainable transport.
Yeah, and one of our remits is transport. I have an interest in transport. I believe in active travel. I believe we need to create spaces around people and to make it easier for us to walk and cycle to our destinations. I believe that because it's much more sociable, it's much more human-centric, but also there's a health outcome there as well, because if you walk and cycle, you're using your body. It becomes a form of active travelling, hence the word active travel, and that gets your heart pumping, burns calories, and as we become much more less active in other forms of life, such as how we work, we need to adapt other parts of our life to become more active, so we can challenge all the health impact of us being less active becomes. So we're becoming more obese. We're having much more susceptible to incurable diseases such as diabetes. But also, while I talk about active travel, it's also about buses, metro systems or tube systems, because the simple fact of the matter is, in terms of carrying capacity, energy efficiency, the amount of space it takes to take a person from A to B, both active travel and public transport are much more superior to the cars. Cars is just a personal convenience.
Yeah. When you and I have often been door knocking, speaking to residents, people who have issues with that transition, particularly people who may not be able to afford, or who cannot afford not to have a car because of what they need to get to work to, etc. And any thoughts on those kind of conversations and how we kind of bring those people along? So, these are people that, will take buses when they can, but often don't have any other, means to kind of access work or run their own businesses, so need cars to get to A to B. So,
I believe there is very much a space for that. The conversations I have. So, one of the things that have been in the public discourse lately is essentially fake news that LTN's ban cars. They don't. In fact, LTNs...
And just the LTNs, for those, again, who I don't know.
Low traffic neighbourhoods.
Yeah.
So these are... They put a modal filter or a block within one part of the road, and it stops cars from going in and out. Sometimes there are modifications to allow residents to come in and out, sometimes not. And people seem to believe that these LTNs, partly by news sites such as GB News, that they ban cars. They don't. They don't even ban cars for residents in there. All it does is you have two ends of your road. One end is blocked off, and what that stops is people using your road as a shortcut, as a back run, and that presents a number of issues for local residents. It creates bad air quality because cars are going through your road, and obviously they have exhaust fumes and particles, but also there's a danger to your children. Like when I grew up, I used to be able to play on the streets. My parents used to be able to play on the streets. Kids can't do that now, and rightfully so, because cars going through those rock runs are dangerous.
Yeah, no, I know it very well. My daughter has, was developing some kind of asthma because of where we are. So it's something I'm deeply conscious about. And just going back to that kind of.
Just want to add one thing.
Okay, go
on. So again, at best, all it is at worst, all it is an inconvenience to local residents where you'll be able to take one route in, well, you won't be able to do that, so you have to take a couple of minutes detour to go to the right exit or entry to your road.
Yeah.
So it isn't really a major hindrance to local residences. But about that policy area about what happens if you need your car, I very much believe that we need to offer disabled parking bays, but also delivery parking bays as well, because if we enable people to accept deliveries, say for Amazon, etc., they're less likely to feel they need a car as well. And I do think there is a public discussion to be had that some people do need their cars.
Yeah.
And we need to offer spaces for them in particular, while also accepting that a majority of people don't.
Yeah, talking about public discussion, so bearing in mind that the biggest contributors to climate change, global warming, etc., are some big oil and gas companies, and individual actions perhaps shouldn't be the focus. But public discussion, we're all trying to get into that new future. Do you think there is something about that inconvenience and sacrifice we perhaps need a bit more collective responsibility for, which is, look, if we want people in politics to make changes, if we want our councillors to make improvements for us, we all have to shoulder a little bit of responsibility to get to a new future. Do you think that discourse needs to happen more, or do you think that's a bit unfair to local residents or to constituents?
So my answer is, if you really want big changes, you need to elect a Labour government. That's it. I just don't have any faith that the Conservatives take climate change seriously, nor willing to take the actions to cut down their emissions. And if you're looking at that big, overwhelming arc of what government and human society should do, you need a collective pool of resources, and we call that government, to act in our best interests. And they are the best platform for doing that, right? But we don't live under a Labour government.
Yet.
And until we do, ultimately all that we can do is act individually, or for councils to act in the interests of residents that after being elected to do so.
Do you mind if I ask a slightly personal question? Do you find it difficult to make hard choices when it comes to inconveniencing people, or do you believe that's what you're elected for, to make those hard decisions and to shoulder that kind of accountability, that responsibility?
That's a very interesting question. Personally, I tried vegetarianism. Actually worked out quite well for a while, but I think it was because of the pandemic. I just couldn't maintain that diet, and I have tried to make those personal choices, and will continue to do so. One of the reasons why I started cycling was because I felt like I needed to cut down my own personal emissions, and I do believe politicians are not public servants, but to act in the public interest. They're there to do what the public needs, not what the public wants. And sometimes that means acting in the interests of the public. And sometimes that means that having those conversations that, well, you may believe that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is something we should do. I mean, I say this like, I'm not your slave. I was elected to act in your best interest and to enact policies that I think are in your best interest. And I think the best political leaders are not ones that are cower when there's a little bit of resistance. It's ones that persevere because they have a sense of conviction that this is the right decision to make. And if our political careers are not successful because of it, then so be it.
That's very interesting. I don't know where to go on that political leadership because there's so much we could unpack about that.
I mean that's going down a rabbit hole.
It sure is. Yeah. So perhaps let's come back to the Greenway.
Yeah.
What do you think the future of the Greenway is? Like, what more can be done? Is there kind of more cultural hotspots, perhaps investment in, pop-up stands or stuff like that?
So there have been discussions with pop-up stands. I think one of the issues here, and certainly it's the reason why it's probably not as used as much as it could be, is because there have been some muggings before the pandemic, and it's perceived as not a safe space. I travelled down it at night plenty of times, and I never once had an issue with it.
So like before the pandemic, definitely I think it was a little bit unsafe, but I think some of the young hoodlums, or if you want to call them, street guys that might congregate, I don't see them congregating on here as much. I mean, particularly because it's well lit now. So
I think there's a number of reasons for that. So one, when they used to do that, they used to mug during a certain time of the day. I think it was between 6 and 7 o'clock or 6 and 7:30.
Okay. Like people going home.
Commuters.
Commuters, yeah.
But I think because the pandemic has changed our habits, and certainly this is much more used than it was before, what we're seeing is a lot more natural surveillance, meaning that because there are more eyes on here than there was before, and you don't have individual cyclists on their own, suddenly there's a risk that if you do mug someone, more people will be there to call the police or actually intervene. So that has deterred them.
That's good.
And so you certainly don't see that as often, and that's one of the reasons why I think we probably need to encourage pop-up stores or some sort of commercial activity on here as well, because it means that rather than just people travelling through it, there's an opportunity in certain areas where there's enough space, such as the bridges, where people would stay
and congregate. Yeah, free space.
And that's less likely for people to do criminal activity when there's a significant higher level of natural surveillance in the area.
Yeah.
And just going back to the muggings, another reason is there's been a lot of work by the local police to patrol the area, and that has also deterred them.
Yeah, it's really good. The future of the Greenway looks bright. It looks progressive. It looks like more inclusive as well. Encouraging all types. Anything else we've missed that you think you wanted to say?
Yes.
Obviously the background. Yeah.
The background. So this is Abbey Mills pumping station. So going back to 1853, big cholera epidemic. The doctor's name, I can't remember him, but he discovered it had to do with our water source.
Yeah, because he overlaid the outbreaks on the map and saw the connection. Yeah.
And then a few years later, I think it's 1858, there was the big stink where members of Parliament just could not work because the Thames was just absolutely just melt. And so those who together pushed the idea of actually creating a big sewage network in London to take all of London's sewage out of the city. And the Greenway was very much part of those plans. So in the 1860s, the Greenway was built by Joseph Bazalgette, and he also built the Abbey Mills pumping station, and this was built between 1863 1865 by a number of engineers, with the chief being Joseph Bazalgette. And this is a beautiful building, and there's another one on the south side by Galleon's Reach by Thamesmead, and it's almost an exact copy of it. And its design is a mesh of different influences. So you have Italian, Venetian, French Gothic, Byzantine, Russian Orthodox, and it's all interwoven into this building.
And I assume that was deliberate, or
well, yeah.
or just different designers came on at different times?
No, it was all deliberate. And the thing about the Victorians, and you see this across all different buildings built in the time, Plaster Station as well, is that they are very majestic. So even in poor communities, they still managed to build these fantastic, majestic buildings, and they're built with style. And this is very much an example of that.
Built with a lot of style.
Yeah.
So it's a pumping station.
Yeah.
Which manages. So it's not very open for public, like.
So it's still owned by Thames Water.
Yeah.
Closed off, but every September, as part of London Open House, it does open for a few days.
That's good.
But good luck trying to find tickets, because I've tried for a few years now and I just haven't been able to get tickets.
Oh, so they do it ticketed? Because some other, like the Royal Courts of Justice and some other like libraries are actually just open, but this one is a ticketed.
Yeah, and
I assume because it's of the critical infrastructure, it has to be.
Probably, but also I suspect it's oversubscribed. So it's quite famous because of its architectural style. And if you're interested in design, architecture, or you're just a Londoner who's interested in things that make London, then this and its sister facility on the other side of the Thames is something that you very much want to get.
Yeah.
And I should mention there's actually a Greenway on the south side of the River Thames as well in
anything
Greenwich.
south of the river, I don't really care about. Only joking. Really?
Yeah.
Like,
so
Greenway.
So by Thamesmead coming into Plumstead.
Okay.
It's smaller than this Greenway.
Of course
actually.
it is, because it's south.
It is, but also it's very short as well. So we're talking about the same size as a path is probably about the size of the Greenway, and it's less taken care of.
Okay.
But they do have a Greenway, and it connects a pumping station, but it's the same design as this, and it connects Thamesmead to Plumstead.
So interesting to know that there's another one as well. So an interesting sign, I suppose, of collaboration between, because if I'm not mistaken, it's Thames Water, Great London Authority, TfL, and just knowing how any civil government department or even public service department is, it must be a lot to bring all those different stakeholders together to say this is what we're doing for this thing, or is it relatively easy? Am I overthinking it?
So I'm not involved in those conversations or delivering that policy. But as an observer and user of the Greenway, my impression is that if there's a problem, they tend to fix it quite quickly. So I think it was a few months ago actually, all the lights of the Greenway of this section just stopped working. And I informed council officers contacted Network UK, and they dealt with the issue and they got it back up and running again. And my impression is that certainly Thames Water on the Greenway itself has been quite sensitive to the idea that it is being used. So actually my observation is that the collaboration works well.
Good stuff. All right, well, let's finish up. One last thing. As someone, third generation East Londoner, looking at the skyline here, it's changing.
Yeah.
What do you think about the future for our area, particularly maybe where we're facing right now, Stratford, and
So London is changing, good and bad. I think density is a good thing with our transport networks. A lot of our housing in the borough was built at the turn of the century when we were facing a different demographic. It was much more lower density. It was very much the suburbs. It isn't now. Like 2 of our stations a couple of our stations actually are in Zone 2.
And some of the busiest in the country.
Exactly.
Stratford, yeah.
Stratford is the busiest station in the entire country. And because of that, we need to start thinking about higher, building much more density. And what I would also say is that every new building we build always comes with an element of a levy or a contribution to civil and community infrastructure, but also affordable housing. Often we're able to allocate about 25 to 30% of every new build towards social housing, sometimes 35%. And so when we build higher, that's how it should be, because we're building more homes to transport centres and local communities that exist in town centres such as Stratford and Canning Town. But also that means that we are dealing with the housing crisis, because the more we build, and with the amount of space that we have available, that means building higher. It means the more homes there are for both people who want to move to Noom and people who live in Noom right now.
Yeah, because I think another one of our challenges is quite a transitionary type of community, as in people live here, you immigrate here for a year or two and then they kind of move out.
We have a whole cohort of people that aren't as fixed as they were before. So I mentioned I lived here my entire life, third generation in Newham, but actually I don't really know people from my childhood who's still around. The odd family, the odd household here and there, but actually most people I know have either moved out to Essex or different boroughs, and the people that live here now came from other places, and actually that's fine.
It is, and I suppose for people like us, because as you know, I've lived here all my life as well. I'm still in the same council house that my family grew up in. So, again, some of the family and friends that I went to primary school with, nursery, etc. Yeah, they've kind of moved out. For me, though, however, it's really important that as the area builds up, those who do want to stay, and those who are in parts with perhaps not as much history as where we've lived, still feel connected to Stratford and want to live here, and their kids play here, so that we aren't just passing each other, and there is a bit of a village or a community, however much we can weave that or
fundamentally, for me, it's about choice. I want to live here. I always lived here. I do have a choice to live here and do so with dignity. That said, other people who lived here, granted, many people have been forced out because of housing costs, and that is a shame. And like I said, the more we build, the more we tackle that. And actually, one day I hope that they have a choice to come back. But also there are plenty of people who actually chose to leave Newham. Some of my cousins actually prefer a much more suburban, rural life in Redbridge.
Probably more garden space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, that's, well, I won't say fundamentally, but actually that's one of the issues with the housing crisis is it takes away people's choice of where they want to live.
It's a really good point. Well, lots to chew over. We might have a part 2 at night, maybe, or some other topic areas. But John, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Ada. Thank you for having me on.
No worries.